we actually got fined by the AFL for breach, and we paid a $50,000 fee. And that $50,000 fee was probably, in hindsight, the best thing we invested.
Deep inside each footy club is the story of how it came to be. Team Builders goes behind the scenes with those who made it all happen, to give insight into the creation of some of Australia's biggest football franchises. With Tasmania in the early stages of building a standalone club, after finally being granted a licence to enter the AFL in 2028, the first new club to enter the national competition in 16 years, Team Builders will look back on all the startup teams that joined the then VFL as it expanded beyond the confines of Victoria. From South Melbourne's move to Sydney in 1982, to the Eagles and Bears in 1987, through to Gold Coast and GWS in 2011 and 2012 respectively, we'll talk to inaugural CEOs, presidents, coaches, and star players to get an inside look into how these AFL teams were built from scratch. This is AFL Team Builders.
Welcome to AFL Team Builders. In this episode, we explore the Port Adelaide Football Club, the Power version, not the historic Magpies. Unlike nearly all other expansion teams launched outside Victoria, the main sources of conflict and drama happened not on the field after launch, but long before Port was granted their licence to join the AFL. Because once they did enter the AFL in 1997, things went rather swimmingly for them on the field. This was certainly no soft launch or a short-term pain before long-term gain mentality. No, Port Adelaide's long-held South Australian National Football League, or SANFL motto of "We exist to win premierships" was the same mindset that they took into the AFL. They didn't win an AFL premiership straight away, of course, but Port was almost immediately competitive, playing finals in their third year and an incredible 7 times in their first 11 seasons, crowned of course by their historic 2004 premiership. It was an immediate level of success that almost belied their startup status. The thing was, of course, that the Power weren't really a startup at all. The AFL team was built upon the foundations of 150 years of SANFL dominance. The Port Adelaide Magpies really were the biggest of big fishes, whales more accurately, in the smaller pond of South Australian footy. Passionately supported by their black and white army, they were feared and despised by those outside the club, and that anger reached another level in the 1990s, when Port Adelaide first tried to enter the AFL. They did so by going around the back of their rival South Australian clubs and even the SANFL itself. It was mid-1990 and the SA clubs had unanimously accepted a SANFL proposal to not to enter a club from SA into the AFL until 1993. Mere weeks later, it was revealed that Port Adelaide, frustrated at losing a Congo line of their best players to Victorian football, and with ambitions to prove themselves at a higher level, started secret negotiations with the AFL to enter the competition ahead of time in 1991. Ironically, it was Port's desperation to join the AFL which fast-tracked the formation of the Adelaide Crows, because only a month after collectively agreeing not to push forward with any AFL plans, the SANFL officially launched a submission for a composite AFL team. After legal action from all parties, the AFL agreed to accept the bid and the Adelaide Football Club was born. There's no doubt that Port's strong-willed, some would say bull-headed, determination to go behind the backs of their league and its clubs made the team an even bigger villain to rivals, as inaugural Port Power CEO Brian Cunningham recalled.
So Port Adelaide had a really successful SANFL history, and at that stage of our development as a club, a lot of players were moving interstate into the VFL and AFL, and we were losing a lot of players. We were playing in one grand final every 2 years, so really successful, had a lot of supporters. And the backstory to us going to the AFL is in 1990, our club tried to get into the AFL. It was asked by the AFL, would you be interested in joining? There's a bigger story to this that I can tell in this podcast, but and ultimately Port Adelaide said, yes, we want to go. The AFL wanted Port to go. The SANFL blocked it. The Adelaide Football Club came to be. Port Adelaide were ostracised and at the end of the day, put back in our box, as it were, in the SANFL and said, stay there.
Port, being Port, refused to take no for a final answer. Almost as soon as they got, in Cunningham's words, put back in their box in the SANFL, they were planning to find another way into the National League. And that opportunity arose in late 1994, when it was announced the club had won the tender for a second South Australian AFL licence, on one condition: a merger had to take place between 2 existing AFL clubs. With the merger of the Brisbane Bears and Fitzroy Lions soon set in stone, Port Adelaide was told midway through 1996 to get themselves ready for the 1997 AFL season, with Cunningham heavily involved in the setup.
we set a plan. We had to tender for the licence, right? The SANFL were the licence holder at that time. They're no longer. The AFL hold the licence, but we had to tender along with other parties, and they were SANFL clubs, either singly or jointly. So we developed over that 2 to 3 year period. We developed a business plan. We developed a tender document. It was 600-page tender document. We did a lot of work, did a lot of lobbying all around Australia with obviously the AFL clubs, because we wouldn't be allowed into the AFL as a second team from the SANFL competition unless the AFL clubs agree. And we drove the argument that, what would it be like to have two clubs in the AFL? What would it be like to have the Adelaide Football Club playing its arch rival who tried to get in 1990 and everyone hated our guts?
It was official. Some 4 years after their initial clandestine attempt, Port Adelaide had won the rights to join the AFL, beating up bids from a Norwood-Sturt merger proposal and a so-called cartel bid made up of Woodville West Torrens, West Adelaide, North Adelaide and Central District. Inaugural Power President Greg Boulton recalls the joy at hearing the news from AFL and SANFL bosses Ross Oakley and Max Bashir respectively.
I think to our members, the highlight was seeing Ross Oakley, Max Bashir, who was the SANFL president, sign with us and make the announcement that we got the licence. Coincidentally, that was on the same day as our AGM. And so we were able to go to a very significant group of members and say, hey guys, we got it. And now we've ensured that Port Adelaide lives forever. Because we always felt being in the national competition was fundamental for our success and fundamental for our supporters. So that night was an outstanding evening. But after that, it was really, get the nose to the grindwheel, because there was a lot to be done. Even though we started planning, we had a special subcommittee planning from 92. We got the licence in 94. We didn't get in 95 or 96. We didn't start to 97. So we had basically 2 years to get the mechanics in place. Even though we had a strong culture base and a good supporter base, we still had to, get a new name, get new Guernseys, get a lot of new people to join up in administrative. And we also were very clear, even though we had a traditional supporter base, we had to grow that base. And so a lot of our thinking was, would this be attractive to the youth? Would this be attractive to non-Port Adelaide supporters?
Port had chased entry to the AFL for so long that the real hard work was now ahead of them. It soon dawned on Cunningham just how big a job it would be, but he and the club was determined to hit the ground running.
We knew one of the key things, we knew we'd go from a $1 million, $1.5 million turnover business in the SANFL, small business, to a $15 to $20 million business. So we had to build, we had to build a club on top of our own club. And our tender was specifically for Port Adelaide to leave the SANFL competition and go to the AFL competition. Didn't quite turn out that way, but we'll come to that a little later. But so we had to build on the 200,000, 250,000 supporters that we knew we had in South Australia. So we had to build a $20 million business. And that meant that we grew from maybe 20 people to 100 people. It was a journey that took a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of people. So our board drove it. Our board, with our chairman, Greg Boulton, were outstanding in driving this vision for Port Adelaide to get into the AFL. I was the chief executive, so I was the implementer of that thinking, and then we did a lot of things. Maybe too much to tell in this time, but we had to build a successful club because we were successful in the past. One of the things we couldn't do was be not successful financially and not win.
Building a new club from the ground up is hard enough, but Port faced the unique situation of being born out of a mega successful SANFL team, which was a double-edged sword according to Boulton.
On the one hand, it was difficult because we divided into two clubs. We had an SANFL club that had to continue and operate at different premises with different people. And that was insisted that the SANFL club survive. I think our view was it would have been better we just took everyone to the AFL. So that was difficult in the first 2 or 3 years, particularly the SANFL club. But for us as an AFL club, it was just a matter of a massive amount of energy and work to get what we wanted a new name, a new song, all that started new. We made a very early decision that from 1995 onwards, we were still playing the SANFL, 95 and 96, one grand final during that period. But we decided, obviously, that we would, at the end of the 1996 season for the SANFL, we would have totally separate administrations. In fact, it was part of the rules that we couldn't cross-pollinate ideas, we couldn't exchange money. We had to operate autonomously and separately.
The club faced two key decisions ahead of its AFL inception. Firstly, after making the black and white stripes feared and despised through South Australia, the new franchise needed new colours and they needed a new nickname. Collingwood's presence in the AFL meant retaining the black and white stripes, or the famous Magpie moniker, wasn't an option. But the Port Power brokers weren't keen on finding a replacement animal. Then, on August 31, 1995, at a packed Adelaide Entertainment Centre, and with Midnight Oil's iconic Aussie anthem Power and the Passion blaring, Boulton launched the new brand with the nickname of the Power and the new colours of silver and teal. The newly nicknamed Port Power then had to find a way to broaden its supporter base, with the majority of footy fans in the state loyal to their SANFL clubs, the Adelaide Crows, or both, as Cunningham recalls.
It was nine other SANFL clubs all supported the Crows, so that we knew they had a 600,000 plus potential membership, supporters, etc. We had about 200,000, and so we concentrated on those 200,000, making those supporters members and sticking. But our long-term plan was that we knew that we'd probably never get all of the rest of the state who would be dead set against us. They would hate us, as they always hated us, because of our success over the years and because we tried to get in the AFL. We would never turn those people around. But what we did want to turn around was we were looking 10, 15 years down the track. What would our supporter base look like? And our supporter base, we wanted a young supporter base. We also knew that 50% of the people who go to the footy are women. Women have a great influence on their children. And so we knew that we had to appeal to younger population and women, which is part of the reason that we chose the colouring, the colours that we chose, not teal. PMS 320 it's a great colour. It's a very attractive colour for kids like it, women like it, etc. It's fashionable, and silver as well, which was a colour that wasn't being used in the AFL. So our plan was, keep the 200,000, make your solid supporter base, make them happy, but build in the future with a younger population. And now when you look at us come into the ground, we walk across the bridge to Adelaide Oval, you look at our supporters and we have a really young supporter base. And obviously, that strategy, if you call it, is now working. And I'm really proud of that. And also a reflection a bit of the fact that we're a Port Adelaide, we're a seaside thing. The teal is a bit of the colour of the water at Semaphore. There's things you can bring into that as well. But we couldn't be black and white for the obvious reasons of Collingwood, etc. We knew that, but the AFL were happy with us having a combination of those colours. So we had a really forward-looking colour in silver, which we're using more and more now, and the teal, which is really attractive to the population that we're trying to win.
Another key task for the Power was to settle on a coach, and it couldn't be anyone else but Jack Cahill, a man who had arguably done more for the club than anybody except for perhaps the great Foz Williams. Cahill stepped aside from his Port Adelaide Magpies SANFL coaching duties midway through 1996 to start preparations for the debut AFL season, and the club then had to build its playing list. Essendon's 1993 Brownlow medalist Gavin Wanganeen was the jewel in their recruiting crown, named inaugural captain, and one of a handful of so-called wildcard recruits, along with Ian Downsborough from West Coast, defender Adam Huskus from Sydney, Fitzroy ruckman Matthew Primus, and Essendon goal kicker Scott Cummins. The club also had sneakily stashed away some of the best young South Australian talents so they could access them ahead of their 1997 debut. They did this by paying a handful of young prospects who had emerged through their SANFL program, Warren Treadray, Peter Burgoyne, Michael Wilson, Paul Evans and Tom Carr, to not nominate for the 1995 draft, a move which would ensure the Power could snare them for free as zone selections in 1996, ahead of their debut season. Tredrea and Burgoyne, of course, went on to become Port Adelaide champions, while the underrated Wilson was the heart and soul of the club during his 192-game Power career. Port also encouraged young big man Brendan Lade from South Adelaide and midfielder Roger James from Norwood to not enter the draft, with that duo amongst the startup AFL team's zone concessions. Again, this was Port Adelaide pushing the boundaries, an act first, apologise later approach. Eventually, the AFL fined Port $50,000 for their underhand draft dealings, but it was money very well spent, according to Boulton.
It's a rare thing happened. We actually got fined by the AFL for breach. And what happened is, and we paid a $50,000 fee. And that $50,000 fee was probably, in hindsight, the best thing we invested. What it enabled us to do is to say to some South Australian players, don't go in the 1995 draft because we'll pick you up in the 1996 draft. So they voluntarily stayed out of that by a bit of persuasion and other methods used by us. No, we technically weren't a member of the league. We agreed to pay it, but the fine was for being in breach of the rules, basically.
For Cunningham, it was a way for Port to overcome what he viewed as meagre concessions from the AFL ahead of entering the league.
One of the things in working through our list, we saw that there were some really talented players, both within our own club and with the other SANFL clubs, people like Brendan Lade and Roger James from Norwood and Brendan from South Adelaide. So we looked at the player lists of the SANFL clubs at that time, and we knew that the AFL were not going to give us great concessions. We were getting that drift already from the clubs in the AFL. So we contracted 6 players: the Warren Tredreas of the world, Brendan Lades, Roger James, Michael Wilson's, some of our top line players who played in that 2004 premiership. We contracted them to a salary and a commitment to stay in South Australia in the draft preceding the draft that we would have and the concessions that we would have. So at that time, we broke the rules, but we broke the rules for a good reason because we knew the concessions were going to be poor. So we kept those top line 6 players in South Australia. They formed part of our nucleus and ultimately our premiership team. And the AFL came back and said, what have you done? We did all the work that we needed to do. We had contracts with them. So all those players committed to play for their clubs in the season prior to our entry, allowing us to pick them up because one of the concessions would be you can pick up local players from the SANFL competition. So that formed a really strong basis for us. And we got fined $50,000. I thought that was a good investment.
Another unheralded yet important signing was Fitzroy key defender Stephen Paxman. He boasted 102 senior games of experience, the second most in the inaugural Power squad behind Gavin Wanganeen's 138 in red and black. Paxman wasn't one of the 8 players chosen by Brisbane as part of the merger with Fitzroy, so he had an option to either go into the national draft and be at the mercy of fate, or look to use the pre-season draft to join a club of his choice. Port soon came calling.
We went into basically a pool of, I think it was delisted free agents from memory. So then we had our, choosing as to whether we nominated for national draft or pre-season draft, and we didn't have any obligation to do either. Or so you didn't have to go into the national draft; you could go to either or. And then just prior to the national draft, Port got in touch with me and said, we'd be interested in acquiring your services. So through my manager at the time, Ron Joseph, we got that sorted out. So I bypassed the national draft and then got their pick one for the pre-season draft in, was it 97? I said I was at Fitzroy for 6 years, and every year I was there was always talk about it was potentially the last year. So I guess the inevitable came. I think I was 25, 26 at the time, so I still thought I had some good footy. So, I guess that one door closed and another one was open. So I was prepared to go anywhere really. I had just had my daughter who was young, but anywhere where I can continue to play footy at the highest level was I would certainly consider. We had some decent conversations with Port Adelaide at the time, and the level or the quality of player that was coming in from the SANFL, which was a really, really good competition at the time as well. I guess there was always going to be those teething issues and the like, but in terms of the quality of the list and the players along the line, it was certainly, I guess, encouraging that we're certainly going to be competitive from the start. That's for sure, and which proved out to be true too.
Paxman wasn't the only one confident of success in Port's inaugural season. Indeed, the Power were not at all interested in a long-term play. They and their supporters expected nothing less than victory and immediate success. There was no blaze of glory in the first 2 rounds, however, as Port copped a reality check in the form of a 79-point belting from Collingwood in their season opener at the MCG, and then a 33-point home loss against Essendon at Football Park. From there, though, the pair went on something of a tear, smashing Geelong by 39 points, winning bragging rights over their crosstown rivals Adelaide in the first showdown, and then beating Brisbane and Richmond to boast a 4-2 record after 6 weeks. The Power looked to be well on track for a maiden final series as September loomed, only to suffer 4 losses and a draw late in the year to miss out on finals by just percentage. Cunningham remembers it as a lost opportunity, lightheartedly pointing the finger at the normally silky skilled Stuart Dew for the failure to play finals.
First season was under our first coach, John Cale, who came from the SANFL and was a legend in South Australia. We played Brisbane at the Gabba in our last game of the year. If we had won that game, we would have been in the finals in our first year in the competition, and that's the success that we wanted. Stuart Dew is one of our great players, and Dewey, everyone knows what a fantastic kick he is. Kicked out from goal with a minute to go, I think, and we were 1 point in front. And normally he'd kick 60 metres and land it right in the lap of anyone. He kicked poorly. They got the ball, kicked a point. We drew the game, so we ended up 9th in that first season. So just an anecdotal story of we wanted to get in the AFL. We needed to be successful. And our first season, we missed the finals by 1 kick, and then ultimately got to the finals in 1999 after 3 years. North Melbourne, who won the premiership that year, knocked us out of the finals, which was okay. And then we had a run in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, where we won more games than anyone else in the AFL. But only won 1 premiership in 2004. But we were in the prelim finals. We got knocked out in 2001, 2 and 3, and we won 2 McCollum trophies in that time. So it was a really successful period that we had. And it was a period where we fulfilled what we said we would fulfill when we said we're coming to the AFL. We want to compete against the best, but we also want to be successful. That was what we wanted, yeah. And it was you call it a pride thing or whatever, but we'd had a lot of success. Our supporters demanded that we do well, and so they wanted to see effort every week on the field. So we wanted to win. Our motto is we exist to win premierships, and that's what we had done in the past. And it was a hard work to almost kill everyone for us to get a premiership in 8 years. Yes, it probably did, but at least we proved that we could do what any other AFL club could do. We could compete, and we could be the best of the best. And so it was a nice journey, but we knew that we couldn't continue. You can't continue to be in a grand final every 2 years in a competition like the AFL. The AFL is so even, and it's evened out by the draft and salary cap and whatever, as everyone knows. But we had to get that premiership in 2004 to justify the pain we went through from 1990.
That finals absence was a rare one for Port. 7 finals campaigns in their first 11 seasons showcases the club's insatiable demand for success. With just the 1 flag since their AFL inception, Port Adelaide's ambition to exist to win premierships may appear to be a touch hyperbolic, but no one can deny the Power's take-no-prisoners approach. Despite a few lulls in on and off-field performance, Port Adelaide isn't a club that accepts mediocrity. The Power is bold, ruthless and driven. And one thing Port's history tells us is that it won't be long until another piece of silverware is added to the club's bulging trophy cabinet.
Look at that. There it is. It's all over. Port Adelaide. They had the power to win. And it was very much history
Thanks for listening to AFL Team Builders, a zerohanger.com production. In next week's episode, we examine the Gold Coast Suns, who, alongside Greater Western Sydney, headlined the AFL's modern expansion into non-traditional football markets. While their future may burn brightly now, a lot went wrong, with some of their mistakes still being felt today.
I remember the AFL came up and said, look, we're going to build you a temporary facility, which was like a small compound of ATCO sheds, and we were meant to be there for, I think it was about 2 years max, and that turned into about 7 or 8 years.